I learned to make coffee for one the morning after Thomas's funeral. 6 months later, I still forgot sometimes, set out 2 cups from habit. Caught myself, put one back angry. The sound of that ceramic hitting the counter too hard, that was the sound of my days now. Small violences against inanimate objects because I couldn't rage at what really deserved it. When did I become someone I wouldn't recognize? The thought came as I caught my reflection in the kitchen. Window, hollow-eyed woman staring back. Hair pulled severe. Mouth tight. 33 years old and I looked 50. Grief aged you that way. Wore you down like water on stone until you were something else entirely. I poured the coffee. Drank it standing at the sink, watching September frost silver the grass. Wyoming mornings came cold that time of year. Beautiful and brutal. Same as everything else about this place. Thomas used to say, winter doesn't ask if you're ready. It just comes. I was starting to understand what he meant. The ranch spread before me. 300 acres of grassland and heartbreak. Everything was breaking. The water pump leaked, dripping steady as a clock ticking down my remaining time. Fence posts sagged where cattle rubbed against them. The north pasture needed work I didn't have hands or money for. Our aging herd moved restless in the distance, sensing the coming cold. I walked the fence line that morning, same as every morning. My boots crunched through frost. The air smelled like metal and sage. That particular scent that meant winter was circling. Waiting? I counted fence posts that needed replacing. Stopped counting at 20. The math didn't work. It never did anymore. Thomas used to ride this line on Juniper. I remembered watching him from the porch, coffee in hand, his easy seat in the saddle. He'd made everything look simple. Managing the ranch, fixing what broke, knowing what needed doing before it became crisis. I'd helped? Sure. But he'd been the one who knew. Now he was gone, and I was still here, and knowing felt impossible. That evening, I sat with the ledger, traced his handwriting in the earlier entries, his neat numbers marching down columns. My handwriting looked frantic next to his, desperate. Which made sense, because I was desperate. The numbers told their own story. Money going out faster than coming in. Winter approaching. No buffer left. I could sell. People had suggested it at the funeral. Sell the ranch. Move to town. Find work that didn't require dawn-to-dark labor and constant worry. Start over somewhere that didn't smell like him, sound like him. Remind me with every fence post and barn beam that he'd built this and I was losing it. But selling meant admitting defeat. Meant admitting he'd built something I couldn't keep. Meant admitting he was really gone and I was really alone. So I didn't sell. I just kept going. Kept getting up before dawn. Kept working past dusk. Kept lying to myself that I was managing fine. The lies we tell ourselves are the ones that break us slowest. I was breaking so slow, I barely noticed. Or maybe I noticed everything and just refused to stop. The next morning, I set out 2 coffee cups again. Caught myself. Put one back. The ceramic made that same hard sound against the counter. Thomas used to say, Wyoming winter doesn't ask if you're ready. It just comes. That first morning when frost silvered the grass, I understood what he meant. Winter was coming. I was alone, and I had no idea if I was strong enough for what was ahead. I was fighting with the frozen pump handle when I heard hoofbeats. My back went straight. We didn't get visitors this far out. Thomas used to say our ranch was where civilization gave up and wilderness took over. I'd liked that when he was alive. Now it just meant I was isolated. Alone with no one to hear if something went wrong. The rider came around the barn. Man on a bay horse, both of them travel-worn. He was maybe 40. Weathered in that way men get when they've spent their lives outdoors. Patient eyes. Hands that knew work. Hat pulled low against the morning sun. I knew his type. Drifters looking for easy work. Men who saw a widow and thought desperate. My spine got straighter. My voice came out harder than I intended. Help you? He stopped, a respectful distance away. Didn't dismount. Morning, ma'am. Name's Jack Morrison. Heard in town you might have work. Heard wrong. He nodded like he'd expected that, which somehow made it worse. Made me feel predictable, transparent. Fair enough. Mind if I water my horse at your trough before moving on? I couldn't refuse that. Wasn't raised to be that kind of rude. Go ahead. He dismounted easy. Led his horse to the trough. The animal was old. Moving careful, I noticed that despite myself. Noticed, too, how Jack moved economical. No wasted motion. Hands gentle on the reins. The horse trusted him. Animals knew things about people. I went back to the pump handle. Pulled hard. The mechanism groaned. Resisted. Ice somewhere in the line. Probably. Or the seal was going. One more thing breaking that I couldn't afford to fix. Seal's gone. I looked up. Jack stood a few feet away. Not crowding. What? The pump? Seal's worn through. That's why it's leaking. He gestured to the puddle. I'm good with repairs. If you change your mind about work. Something hot flashed through my chest. Anger, maybe. Or embarrassment that he'd seen the problem I'd been ignoring. I'm managing fine. Didn't say you weren't. Don't need help. Didn't say you did. Men who didn't argue were dangerous. They saw too much. I crossed my arms. Defensive. I can't afford hired hands. Wasn't asking about money. He picked up his horse's reins. Just offering, but I understand. Pride matters. The way he said it, gentle. Knowing made me want to throw something. Pride. Like that's all this was. Like I was just some stubborn woman too foolish to accept help she obviously needed. He started to mount. I should have let him. Should have watched him ride away and gone back to my impossible task of keeping this ranch running alone. Should have maintained the walls I'd built so carefully over 6 months of grief. Instead, I heard myself ask, "Where you headed?" He paused. Nowhere particular. Following the work. There's a ridge about 2 miles northwest. Good camping. Stream runs year-round. Why was I telling him this? Why was I making it easy for him to stay close? Appreciate that. He settled into the saddle. If you change your mind, I'll be around. I watched him ride away. Watched until he disappeared over the rise. The pump dripped behind me. Steady as a heartbeat. Steady as time running out. Part of me wanted to call him back. That part terrified me more than winter. More than failing. More than anything except admitting Thomas was really gone. And I was really alone. I turned back to the pump I couldn't fix. The fence line I couldn't reach before dark. The impossible math of one woman doing 2 people's work. His offer echoed in my head all night. I buried it with all the other things I couldn't afford to feel. The first real blizzard hit 3 days later. September blizzards were rare but vicious when they came. This one came with a vengeance, 3 days of whiteout. Wind howling like something alive and angry. I was trapped inside, watching snow pile against the windows, listening to my cattle bawl in the distance. I had feed stored in the barn, but I couldn't reach it, couldn't see 10 feet in the storm. All I could do was wait and pray and hate my own helplessness. By the 3rd day, the howling stopped. The silence that followed felt wrong. Too quiet. Too still. I forced the door open against the snowdrift. Sunlight on white snow blinded me. Everything was buried. Drifts 10 feet high against the barn. My truck completely covered. The world transformed into something alien. I found the first dead cow in the ravine, then the second. Both frozen, caught trying to reach shelter they couldn't find in the whiteout. 2 head, $700 each, roughly. $1,400 I didn't have, couldn't afford to lose, had just lost anyway. I stood there in snow up to my knees, looking at their frozen bodies, and something in me cracked. Not broke cracked, like ice splitting. That sound before it shatters completely. Thomas would have saved them. Thomas would have known the storm was coming, would have moved them earlier, would have done 100 things I didn't know to do. I made it to the barn before the tears came. Sank down in the hay, alone in the dark where no one could see me break. The grief I'd held back for 6 months poured out. I cried until my chest hurt, until my throat was raw, until I couldn't cry anymore. That's where I was when Jack Morrison found me the next morning. I heard boots on the barn floor. Looked up, red-eyed and hollow. He stood in the doorway, hat in hands, not coming closer. Heard cattle in distress during the storm. Came to check. I'm fine. My voice came out wrecked. Didn't ask if you were fine. He gestured to the ravine visible through the barn door. Lost some. I'm guessing 2? He winced. I'm sorry. Something about his tone gentle, genuine, absent of pity, made me believe him. I can't afford to lose cattle. Can't afford to fix the pump. Can't afford much of anything anymore. Why was I telling him this? Why was I admitting things I'd told no one? What can you afford? I laughed. It sounded broken. Not hired help. Didn't ask what you couldn't afford. Asked what you could. I looked at him. Really looked. He wasn't pushing, wasn't leveraging, just standing there, offering something I desperately needed and couldn't bring myself to accept. 2 cattle or my pride, the ranch or my stubbornness, living or drowning. When did survival become a choice? I can pay minimum for repairs, I said finally. Pump first, then fences before the next storm. He nodded. That works. This is business, I added quickly. Not friendship, not charity. You work, I pay, temporary, just until I get ahead of things. Understood. Don't need a ranch hand, just need some repairs done. Yes, ma'am. I stood up, brushed hay off my jeans, tried to salvage some dignity. You can use the bunkhouse if it's still standing. Haven't checked it since last spring. Appreciate it. Start tomorrow. Start today. If you want, pump won't fix itself. I wanted to argue. Wanted to send him away, maintain my walls, keep pretending I could manage alone. But the dead cattle in the ravine told a different story. The leaking pump told a different story. The impossible math told a different story. Today, then, I said. He left. I heard him moving around outside, assessing the pump. I sat back down in the hay. Exhausted. Defeated. Relieved. I told myself it was temporary, practical, business. I told myself accepting help for repairs wasn't admitting I needed someone. I was lying. I think we both knew it. By the time the second blizzard hit in November, Jack Morrison had fixed my pump, replaced 12 fence posts, and said maybe 30 words to me. I thought that was how it would stay, 2 people working the same land, keeping careful distance. Winter had other plans. Winter always does. The thing about working near someone every day is you start noticing things you don't want to notice. I noticed Jack was always up before dawn. Noticed the morning feeding was done by the time I got to the barn. Fresh hay scattered. Water troughs checked. I never asked him to do that. He never mentioned doing it. I noticed firewood stacked by the barn door. Neatly. Precisely. The kind of stacking that said someone cared about doing things right. I noticed hot coffee left on the porch rail some mornings, still steaming. He'd leave it and disappear before I came out, like he didn't want thanks or acknowledgement. I wanted to stay angry at these intrusions. But how do you stay angry at someone who asks for nothing and gives everything November settled in cold and gray? Jack worked outside mostly. Repaired fence lines, maintained equipment, did all the tasks Thomas used to handle. He ate alone in the bunkhouse, kept respectful distance. We developed a rhythm, silent, separate, careful. But I watched him. Caught myself doing it more than I liked. Watched from the kitchen window as he worked. His hands were capable, patient. He never rushed, never wasted movement. There was something almost meditative about the way he approached tasks. One morning I found him in the barn, working on Thomas's tack. The bridle Thomas had started repairing the day before the accident. Unfinished for 6 months, hanging where he'd left it. Jack was finishing it. I stood in the doorway, frozen, watched his careful fingers work the leather, replacing the worn strap. His movements respectful. Like he understood he was completing something sacred, something left undone. Memory flooded back. Thomas at this same bench, hands moving over leather. His concentration. The small smile he'd get when working with his hands. The smell of leather oil and hay. The particular quality of light through the barn slats. Something cracked in my chest. Not breaking. Just shifting, making room for something I wasn't ready to name. Jack looked up, saw me, his hands stilled. Should have asked. Sorry. No, it's... My voice came out rough. It's fine. Thank you. He nodded, went back to work. I fled before the tears could start. That evening, there was venison stew by my door. Rich, warm, probably from a deer he'd hunted. I took it inside, sat at the table alone, ate it slowly, angry at how good it tasted, angry at how long it had been since someone cooked for me, angry at my own gratitude. December came, snow piled high. The cold should have driven us apart, made working together harder. Instead, something shifted. We stopped being so careful around each other. I caught him talking to Juniper one morning. My mare, Thomas's wedding gift to me. Jack stood with her in the corral, his voice low, gentle, easy. Girl, I know. I miss him too. He didn't know I was listening. The intimacy of that private kindness undid something in my chest, made the walls harder to maintain. Later that day, we worked fence repairs together. Cold so bitter our breath frosted the air. We'd been working in silence for an hour when he asked, "Your mare?" She got a story. I almost didn't answer. But the cold and exhaustion made me honest. Wedding gift. Thomas gave her to me the day we married. Said every ranch wife needed a good horse. She's well trained. He trained her himself. Spent months on it. I hammered a nail. Hard. She misses him. I can tell. Keeps looking for him in the mornings. Jack was quiet a moment. My horse is 15. Getting old. Probably his last winter. What's his name? Soot. Had him since he was 3. His voice held old grief. Wife named him. She said he was the color of fire ash. Wife. Past tense. She passed 12 years ago. Childbirth. Baby too. The words hung in the cold air. I looked at him. Really looked. Saw the lines around his eyes. The way grief had carved his face. We'd both lost something irreplaceable. He was the first person who didn't try to tell me it would be okay. I'm sorry. I said. Me too. We went back to work, but something had changed. Some wall had lowered. We weren't strangers anymore. We were two people who understood loss, who knew how it felt to keep moving when moving felt impossible. That night, snow falling soft outside, both of us working in the barn in comfortable silence. I realized I wasn't alone in the way I'd been alone for 6 months. The realization should have relieved me. Instead, it terrified me, because if I let myself need him, what happened when he left? I started counting things I didn't want to count. How many times he smiled. How many times I almost smiled back. How many days I hadn't cried. How many days I'd stopped wanting him to leave. I noticed the second coffee cup before I realized I'd set it out. Old habits, I told myself. Lies, myself answered. Thomas was gone. Jack was here. And I was terrified of what that meant. December brought brutal cold, the kind that turned breath to ice, made metal burn to touch, killed anything caught outside unprepared. I was moving cattle to shelter. Should have done it earlier, but I'd been distracted. Behind on everything. Now the temperature was dropping fast, and I had 15 head still in the north pasture. I took the shortcut across the creek. Ice looked solid. I tested it. Seemed fine. 3 steps out. It broke. The shock of cold water stole my breath. Current pulled at my legs, stronger than expected. I gasped, swallowed water, went under. My heavy coat dragged me down. I kicked, surfaced, grabbed for the ice edge. It broke again in my hands. Terror hit. Real. Primal terror. I was drowning. Actually drowning. And no one knew where I was. Then hands grabbed my coat. Pulled. Jack's voice, rough and urgent. Stop fighting me. I couldn't stop fighting. Panic made me flail. He pulled harder, dragged me onto solid ice, then onto the bank. I was shaking too hard to argue when he picked me up, carried me toward the house despite my attempts at protest. My pride wanted to object. My freezing body was grateful. He got me inside, built up the fire, wrapped me in blankets, Thomas's old blankets. I noticed dimly. Made tea. Sat across the room, not crowding, giving me space, even now. I shook for what felt like hours, teeth chattering so hard I bit my tongue. The cold went bone deep. Worse than the cold was the humiliation. I'd been reckless. Stupid. Could have died from my own pride. Should lecture me, I said finally. My voice came out small. About what? Being reckless? Taking shortcuts? Not being more careful? He shook his head. You did what you thought was right. Sometimes the ice looks solid. Sometimes it breaks anyway. I could have drowned. But you didn't, because you were there. This time, he leaned forward, elbows on knees. Want to know something 5 years back? I tried to move my entire herd alone during a storm. Neighbor offered help. I refused. Lost 12 head because pride made me stupid. 12. Could have been saved if I'd accepted help. But I had to prove I could manage alone. His voice went quiet. Some lessons cost. I studied him across the room. This man who gave me space like it was treasure, who helped me without making it feel like rescue, whose grief mirrored mine in ways I was only beginning to understand. Why do you help me? I asked. I've been nothing but rude, barely civil. You could have moved on a dozen times. Because I know what it's like. He met my eyes. Trying to do everything alone? Convinced accepting help means you failed. Building walls so high you forget you're burying yourself alive. He paused. Your husband built something worth keeping. That's not a burden. That's a gift. And gifts are meant to be shared. The words settled into my chest. Changed something fundamental. I'm terrified, I admitted, of failing him, of losing this place, of admitting I can't do it alone. Doing it alone isn't strength. It's just stubbornness. His voice was gentle. Real strength is knowing when to let someone help carry the weight. We sat in silence, fire crackling, my shaking finally subsiding. Something had shifted between us. A door I'd kept locked had opened a crack. And cold as I'd been, frozen as I was, I felt warmer than I had in 6 months. That terrified me most of all. Thank you, I said, for pulling me out. He just nodded. But we both knew I wasn't just thanking him for the rescue. I was thanking him for seeing past my walls, for being patient, for staying when I'd given him every reason to leave, for teaching me that needing someone wasn't weakness. It was the beginning of wisdom. The ice storm hit in January. Came fast and vicious power lines snapping under ice weight, temperatures plummeting to 20 below. The cattle shelter partially collapsing under accumulated snow and ice. I didn't think, just ran. Ran to Jack's bunkhouse, pounded on the door. He opened it, already pulling on his coat. He'd heard the shelter collapse. I need help, I said. No pride, no pretense, just honest desperation. Now, let's go. We worked 2 days straight. Desperate, exhausting work. Moving cattle to safer ground, shoring up the damaged shelter, distributing feed in the brutal cold. No time to think, no time for ego, just survival. I handled what I knew: cattle, feeding, calming frightened animals. He handled what he knew: structural repairs, equipment. We problem-solved together. No orders given or taken. Just 2 people working as a unit. I'd forgotten what partnership felt like. Or maybe I'd never known it could be this way: equal, balanced. Neither person diminished by the other's strength. By the second night, we'd saved all but 3 head. Better than I'd dared hope. We sat in the barn afterward, too cold and exhausted to move. My hands shook from fatigue. My lungs burned from breathing frozen air. You're stronger than you think, Jack said. I laughed. It came out tired, but real. Maybe, but I'm smarter with help. He smiled. First real smile I'd seen from him. It transformed his face, made him look younger, made something flutter in my chest that I wasn't ready to examine. We make a good team, he said. We do. The words hung between us. Heavy with meaning, we weren't ready to speak aloud. The storm passed. Sunrise came cold and clear. We stood outside watching light paint the snow gold. Steam rose from the cattle's breath. Everything glittered with ice. Thank you, I said, for staying, for helping. Partners help each other. Partners. The word settled warm in my chest. This was what Thomas and I had. What I'd been trying to replicate alone. But you can't partner with yourself. That's just loneliness with extra steps. What happens when winter ends? I asked. Couldn't help it. The question had been building for weeks. He looked at me. Something in his eyes I couldn't quite read. What do you want to happen? I opened my mouth, closed it. I didn't know how to answer. Didn't know how to admit that somewhere in the last 3 months, his presence had become essential. That I'd started depending on him in ways that terrified me. That I wasn't sure I could go back to alone. I don't know, I said, finally. He nodded, didn't push. Well, winter's not over yet. We went back to work, but the question lingered. What happens when winter ends? What happens when temporary becomes something else? What happens when I have? To choose, I wasn't ready for any of those answers, but ready or not, they were coming. Late January brought a different kind of cold. The kind that settled in your bones and made everything feel impossible. Jack was in town, getting supplies. First time I'd been alone in the house since November. The silence felt wrong. Empty. I couldn't sleep. At 3 a.m, I gave up trying. Went to the kitchen, made coffee. Sat at the table with Thomas's letter. I'd found it in his coat pocket after the accident. Written the morning he died. Never mailed. Plans for spring. Hopes for the future. His love written plain in his careful handwriting. Live big, Sarah. He'd written at the end. Don't make yourself small for anyone. He'd meant it for the world. For people who might try to diminish me. But sitting there in the dark, I wondered if it applied to grief too. If maybe living big meant choosing life over fear. Even when fear was safer. I read the letter again, traced his words with my finger, felt the old grief rise up sharp and fresh. If I let Jack stay, was I replacing Thomas, betraying everything we'd built? The guilt was crushing, suffocating. I'd spent 6 months building walls to keep grief in and help out. But the walls that protected me were also burying me alive. What if I opened my heart and it broke again? What if I let myself love and lost again? Could a person survive that twice? Did I have the courage to find out I could tell Jack winter was over soon? Pay him out. Return to isolation. It would hurt, but it would be safe. No risk of depending on someone who might leave. Who might die? Who might prove that happiness wasn't something I got twice? But sitting there in the dark, I realized something. The worst lies are the ones we tell ourselves in darkness. I'd told myself I was honoring Thomas's memory by suffering alone. But Thomas had loved my laugh, my joy, my life. What honor was there in killing those things? What memorial was misery? Thomas's last words in that letter. Live big. Sarah, don't make yourself small for anyone. He'd meant it. He'd want me to live. Actually live. Not just survive. Not just exist in this half state of grief and duty. But could I do it? Could I choose to be happy again? Choose to hope again? Choose Jack? The question terrified me. The answer terrified me more. Dawn edged the windows gray. I heard hoofbeats. Jack returning. I was still sitting with the letter, tear-stained and hollow. He came in quiet, took in the scene me at the table, the letter. My red eyes. Didn't ask questions. Just added wood to the fire, started making coffee. 2 cups, without asking. Without making it a big gesture. Just natural. Right? Something in that simple act steadied me. He wasn't trying to replace Thomas, wasn't trying to make me forget. He was just here, present, patient, making space for my grief while also claiming his own place in my life. You okay? He asked finally. No, I said honestly, but I will be. He brought me coffee, sat across from me, waited. I've been thinking. I stopped, started again. About what happens when winter ends. He nodded, didn't speak. Let me find my words. I'm scared, I admitted, of failing, of losing, of needing someone and having them leave, of letting myself be happy and having it taken away. All of that makes sense. But I'm more scared of this. I gestured around us. Of living half alive forever. Of letting fear make all my choices. Of dying before I'm actually dead. So what do you want to do? I looked at him. Really looked. This man who'd stayed when I gave him every reason to leave. Who'd helped without asking for anything. Who'd been patient with my walls and gentle with my grief. Stay, I said. It came out stronger than I expected. I want you to stay. His eyes held mine. You sure? No, but I'm done letting fear decide for me. He smiled. Slow and real. Then I'll stay. We sat there as dawn broke full, light spilling through the windows. The start of a new day. I wasn't fixed, wasn't healed, still scared, still grieving, but maybe that was okay. Maybe you didn't have to be whole to choose happiness. Maybe you just had to be brave enough to try. Thomas's letter still lay on the table. His words glowed in the morning light. Live big, Sarah. I was trying. God help me. I was trying. March brought thaw. Snow melted slow, revealing the bones of winter. Everything the cold had hidden came visible again. I walked the property that morning, taking stock. Everywhere I looked, I found evidence of Jack's care. Fence lines I'd thought I repaired stood straight because he'd quietly fixed them right. Gates rehung properly, equipment maintained. Small acts of service scattered across the ranch like love notes I hadn't noticed until now. Love notes. When had I started thinking of them that way, I found Jack at the bunkhouse, his bedroll packed. Horse saddled. My heart dropped like a stone. You're leaving. He turned. His face was careful. Neutral. Winter's over. Job's done. No. This wasn't how this was supposed to go. I'd decided. I'd chosen. Why was he leaving my defenses snapped up? Old and familiar. What do you want payment beyond what we agreed? You think you can leverage Sarah? His voice cut through my panic, gentle but firm. Stop. I stopped, breathed, forced myself to look at him. I'm not trying to manipulate you, he said quietly. I'm trying to do right by you. You hired me for winter repairs. Winter's done. I'm giving you the choice. No pressure, no obligation. Choice about what? About whether you want me to stay. The words hung between us. Heavy, important. I thought about the coffee cups, the shared silences, the way he made me laugh again, the way he saw past my walls to the person underneath, the way I'd stopped counting days without him and started dreading the thought of days ahead with him gone. But fear rose up too. What if I asked him to stay and he left anyway? What if I opened my heart completely and it shattered? Again, I need to tell you something first, Jack said. He looked past me, toward the horizon. My wife, Anna, when she died, I convinced myself I'd failed her, that if I'd been stronger, more capable, somehow different, I could have saved her. So I isolated myself, spent 5 years proving I didn't need anyone. He paused. Neighbor finally got through to me, refused to accept my refusal of help, taught me something I'd forgotten. One person working alone can survive. 2 people working together can thrive. That's not weakness. That's wisdom. He looked back at me. Your husband was gone. My wife was gone. But we were still here. Still living. And living alone isn't living. It's just not dying. The words settled into my chest. Truth always felt like that. Heavy and right. I spent 6 months building walls, I said, convinced I was honoring Thomas by doing everything alone. But Thomas loved my laugh, my joy, my life. He'd hate what I became, half dead, half alive, too scared to choose either fully. I took a breath, steadied myself. This was it. The moment. The choice. Stay, I said. Clear, certain, not as hired help, as partner, equal work, equal say, equal stake in this place. Thomas built something worth keeping. I can't do it alone. I don't want to do it alone. Not anymore. Jack studied me. You sure this isn't about needing rescue? This is about choosing partnership. I cut him off. There's a difference. I'm not asking because I'm weak. I'm asking because I'm finally strong enough to admit I want this. Want you, want us. Something shifted in his expression. Warmed. I was hoping you'd ask. Been hoping since January. Didn't want to push. Didn't want you choosing out of obligation or fear. Wanted you to choose because you wanted to. I'm choosing, I said. I'm terrified and uncertain and probably going to mess this up in 100 ways. But I'm choosing. He extended his hand. Partners then. I took it. His palm was warm, calloused, solid, real. We shook formal, businesslike. But his thumb traced my wrist. My fingers tightened on his. The touch shifted from transaction to promise. Thomas will always be part of this land, I said. Part of this life. Part of me. I know. Jack's voice was gentle. I'm not asking you to forget him. Just to make room for something new alongside the old. I can do that, I smiled. Felt it reach my eyes for the first time in months. We can do that. Together. We stood there, hands clasped, spring sun warming our faces. The ranch spread before us. Our ranch now. Our future, Thomas would approve, I thought. He'd loved me enough to want me happy. Even if he couldn't be the one to make me so. And Jack. Jack understood that Thomas would always be present in this place. He wasn't asking me to choose between past and future, just to integrate them. Honor both. I could do that. We could do that, together. I'd been so scared of betraying Thomas's memory that I'd almost betrayed his final wish for me to live big. To choose joy, to build a life worth living. Turns out the best way to honor the dead is to keep living really living for both of you. Come on, I said, pulling Jack toward the house. I'll make us breakfast. We've got plans to make. Plans, partners plan together, don't they? He smiled, full and genuine. They do. We walked into our future side by side. Equal, chosen, home. Spring moved into summer the way it does in Wyoming, slow then all at once. One day, snow still edged the shadows. Next day, everything was green and growing. The ranch transformed. New fence lines, repaired barn, healthy cattle thriving in good pasture. Garden planted first one I'd tended in 2 years. Hope replacing desperation in every corner. But more than the external changes, I'd transformed internally. Learned to laugh again, to hope again, to believe the future could hold joy instead of just survival. Morning coffee became ritual. Jack made it strong. I added honey. We'd sit on the porch watching sunrise paint the mountains gold, planning our day. Our conversations flowed easy now. Disagreements resolved with respect, decisions made together. The rhythm of partnership settling into place like something we'd been doing all our lives. One evening, I showed him Thomas's letter. We sat at the kitchen table, lamp glowing warm between us. He read it carefully, reverently. "He loved you well," Jack said, finally. "He did." So did I fail by comparison. His tone was light, but his eyes held real question. "You're not a comparison." I took his hand. "You're a continuation. Different, but equal. Thomas was my first love. You're my second chance. Both matter. Both are real." We talked about grief that night, about loss, about what it meant to build new happiness without betraying old love. Jack understood he'd walked this path before me, knew how complicated it was, how guilt could poison joy if you let it. "Thomas's memory doesn't fade," I said. "It just settles into its rightful place. Foundation instead of prison. Anna's too." Jack squeezed my hand. "They made us who we are, taught us how to love. Without them, we wouldn't be here, wouldn't have found each other. So they brought us together in a way, it felt right. That acknowledgement, honoring the past while embracing the future. Both at once. Not choosing between them, but holding both as true. By summer's end, practical partnership had deepened into something more. Mutual respect became affection. Affection became love, slower and steadier than the first time, but no less real. Our first kiss happened working side by side, hands muddy from garden work. I laughed at something he said. He looked at me like I was sunrise, and it just happened. Natural as breathing. Right as rain. We took it slow after that, both of us learning to trust again, learning our rhythms, building something solid that could weather whatever storms came next. September brought first frost. Full circle from the year before. I woke early, made coffee, set out 2 cups without thinking. Jack wrapped his arm around my waist as we watched sunrise. "Think we're ready for winter?" he asked. I leaned into him, solid and warm and real. Together, we're ready for anything. He kissed the top of my head. We stood there watching light change, watching our cattle graze, watching our future unfold. I thought about the woman I'd been a year ago, brittle, alone, drowning in grief. Thought about the woman I was now, loved, partnered, alive again. Jack was right about everything. 2 people working together don't divide strength. They multiply it. Partnership doesn't diminish independence. It magnifies what one person alone could never achieve. I'd confused being alone with being strong, confused isolation with integrity. Winter taught me different. That first winter after Thomas died, I thought accepting help meant admitting defeat. Spring taught me different. Strength isn't about shouldering every burden alone. It's about having the courage to share the load with someone who'll carry their half with honor. Jack didn't rescue me. We rescued each other. Built something together neither of us could have built alone. Grief doesn't end, doesn't disappear. It just changes shape, becomes part of you instead of all of you. Thomas will always be part of this ranch, part of my story. But so will Jack, and so will I, the woman I am now, shaped by loss and strengthened by love. Both loves, old and new. I used to think you got one chance at happiness, one love, one life. But standing here with Jack, watching our ranch thrive, our future unfold, I know different now. You get as many chances as you're brave enough to take, as many loves as your heart can hold, as many lives as you're willing to live. That afternoon, we rode out to check cattle together, side by side, Equals in every way that matters. The land stretched before us, gold and green and beautiful. Our land, our life, our choice. Winter had taken everything I thought I knew about strength, about love, about living. Spring proved me beautifully, eternally wrong, and I've never been happier to be mistaken.